Welcome to the E-Talking Podcast. Today we're here with a couple of regular panellists and a brand new panellist. So we've got from eracing.net, it's Conrad O'Keefe, and from Formula E Zone we've got Sophie Barker, and also from Motorsport 101 and also just general motorsport industry punditry, we have America's Ryan Erik King. Hello, Ryan.
Yes, glad to be here, and I could... I have a hunch why you invited me on for this show.
Well, it's obviously... but by the way, I'm Stuart Garlick from Emotion Formula E. Always forget to mention that. It's pretty much partly because Conrad said that you'd be a good guest, and I had heard your Formula 2 podcast when it happened, and I thought, yeah, he would be. So it was about time we brought in our Pato O'Ward from North America to spice things up a bit and make things interesting. So yeah, you're our super sub. I'm not saying who's Ranger Nathan, but no. The audience can make up their own minds on that. All right, so the topics that I had pegged to talk about this time, and guys, feel free to jump in with anything that comes into your mind. Jean-Eric Vergne looks to be on course for the Formula E title, but will the New Yorkie Prix bring a spanner in the works? And will it be a bit of a lotterer? Who knows? Can anyone seriously beat him? What can we expect from NYC? What's the track like? Does it produce good racing? Do the US fans like Formula E? Looking at the back end of the field, if we had a clean sheet of paper, what would we do to turn around things at Dragon, Neo, Venturi and Jaguar? What would we change? Have we been following the I-Pace Trophy? Do we find it remotely exciting? What could we do to make it more exciting next season? And I also want to get tips for my upcoming road trip, which is... My first ever road test, which I'll tell you about later on. And hey, so guys, first of all, we all saw the Swiss E-Prix. It was maybe not the most exciting race of the season, but it was extremely exciting, I think, once Mitch Evans got his Mac on, as it were. So what did we think of the circuit at Bern, and are we sad that it's not going to host another race? Let's start with Sophie.
I think it's a nice circuit. I think I've always since it's been part of Formula E, I've always enjoyed the Swiss E-Prix, but I think just logistically, I think the whole thing has been a slight bit of a nightmare, not just for travel and for fans, but for media as well, with how far away the actual media centre is from the track. I think, the track, it's always been a typical tight Formula E circuit. I think, maybe not the biggest fan of Turn 1, as I made pretty clear, but I'm going to miss it. I think it was nice to have a race back in Switzerland finally, and I think it's going to be a bit sad for it to go, but I think, again, logistically, probably wasn't the best of races to be on there.
Well, yeah, and although there were some interesting moments of negative camber there, which threw a few cars wide at the hairpin, which is always fun. That first chicane right after the start, and the sound on the TV of boom, 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 as almost the entire field came together. That was physical comedy of the kind that Will Ferrell used to excel at, wasn't it, Conrad?
You could definitely say so. My opinions on holding it in Bern, I mean, it's no secret. There's been definitely a vocal group, don't know really whether to call them a minority or more than that, but they've been protesting in force against the Formula E circuit in Bern, which is sad, to be honest, because it's a beautiful place to hold one, and even the wildlife, the bears, decided to show up and give a little bit of support to procedures. But yeah, it isn't what Formula E needs. I mean, they even made a piece of music to go along with the protests. How they didn't want Formula E to be there, and
let's not stand together.
Yeah, I definitely love Bern, and I'll be sad to see it go. But does Formula E really need to have those kind of protests again and again? I don't think it's the case for all of Switzerland. I mean, that wasn't the case in season 4. and it could just be a Bern-specific issue or areas like that within Switzerland, but Formula V's broken so much new ground there anyway. There's definitely positives you can take out of it. The fact that it was the first Swiss motor race to be held since the 50s, and Formula E got that honour. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, you saw the race. What did you think of the circuit? And was Bern a flawed choice for a Formula E venue?
I'd say the circuit itself, I'd probably say, it's weird to classify. I'd say it's a great driving circuit, but in terms of racing car to car, there was a little bit to be desired. But in general, I really enjoyed the circuit. The protests surrounding the circuit, it's strange that it's not new for Formula E, because the season in Montreal, there are protests surrounding that. While a lot of the other venues don't see protests in that scale, there's vocal opposition to most of the places where Formula E goes to now. Like recently this season in Paris, there's strangely been a turn in political support for the Paris E-Prix, where En Marche, the party that supported the start of the Paris E-Prix, is now against the Paris E-Prix, because now the E-Prix is not popular with the Parisian residents. It's very strange. It's very strange to just say nonetheless.
So could you say that Formula E events are being held, well, might not have started this way, but are being used more and more for political gain, that political powers that be are realising that Formula E is a sport that's being taken seriously and is becoming more and more of a pawn? Would you compare it to that?
No, I'd probably say it is a very not in my backyard kind of thing, where people like the idea of having an E-Prix in their city, but most E-Prix, including the upcoming one in New York, are held in residential neighborhoods. So when they get the E-Prix, they don't realize how much of a disruption it's going to be till it gets there, and realizes maybe it'd be best if we had it in a different part of the city, or, in a less, traveled part of the city where it doesn't affect overall traffic across the city as much. But it seems like the concept of hosting an E-Prix is very popular, but when it stops being an issue of being a proposal on paper and becomes an actual event, that's when the turn happens, when people say, hey, we didn't expect these other things to come along with the E-Prix. Maybe we don't want to host the event anymore.
Yes, and the problem is that the more people protest, particularly in European events, and I know that the internet is divided on Battersea. I personally was not reporting on Formula E when that happened, so I'm going to stay out of the Battersea debate. But it's an example of how in Europe, because protest is ingrained in our cultures, and because civil unrest is seen as part of the democratic process. Unfortunately, sport doesn't like that very much, and my fear is that Mr. Agag will look at this and decide to take more races to places where either it's so far out that people don't have any reason to protest, or places where protest just isn't part of the culture in the same way, a la Addiria. The problem is that we're already getting the European season broken up next season with a race in Seoul. Fine, but if we start to lose, the big blue ribboned events like Paris, Berlin, we've lost Bern after this season. If the Italian populists start realising that Formula E is a political hot potato, we could have an issue with maintaining a European season, which obviously for the hobbyists who fly around reporting on races for small sites like myself, that's going to be difficult to put a season together in that case. So from a selfish point of view, it's bad, but I think from a European generally point of view, it's bad as well. But Sophie, what do you think about that?
think in a way I agree that a gag could start taking Formula E to different places where, like he said, my mind has gone completely blank. I know what I'm trying to say.
Is it something to do with having to introduce Formula One to somebody who's never seen a race before a minute ago? Because that would blow my mind as well.
I've been having to do it all week.
So, just talk us through the process. That's what I meant. Just talk us through the process of introducing someone who's never seen a motor race on TV to motor racing. How difficult is it?
Oh, it's horrendous. Absolutely, do not recommend it to anyone.
You know what's the worst bit about this? The fact that they're probably going to think that F1's like that every weekend, and they are. It's just not going to be.
I tell you what, it's a bloody good thing they waited until this race to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, perfect.
It really is.
I mean, that's how F1 gets you. It's like you have that one good race, and then you spend every race looking for that feeling again.
Exactly.
Here's a little curveball, right? What Formula E race was the first that you saw that you got into, or F1?
For Formula E, I was there since race 1. I was
was as well. Beijing 2014.
Because surprisingly enough, back when the series launched, they had sent Motorsport 101 an invite to the launch party in London. So my co-host Andre Harrison went to the launch party for the series.
I think the first Formula E race I saw may well have been. Oh gosh, which was the one where Nico Prost smacked into Nick Heidfeld on the last lap?
That was the first race.
That was the first race.
Yeah,
Beijing.
So that was the first race. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It still blows my mind that Nico Prost is, I think, the 10th or 11th most successful Formula E driver of all time.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Wow.
But even though that's like what the probably there have been like 30 Formula E drivers, it feels like. I wouldn't have an exact number in my mind, but...
Yeah, but I may have got that number wrong. I'm sure people will be writing in the comments if I have. But yeah, so that was the first. So I was actually there I was actually there watching on the first race then. But watching it back recently, and I made this comment on Twitter. It feels a bit like watching season 1 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, because all your favourite characters are there, and they're all doing things vaguely contiguous with what you'd expect them to do. But it's just that there's no rapport and nobody's arguing, and it's and they haven't quite got into their general groove of what they do. It took Star Trek: The Next Generation until season 3. I think it took Formula E until season 3 for that to happen, didn't it? Really? Yeah,
I'd probably say season 3 was really when all the pieces came together, and we really had a championship that went down to the wire. Well, not literally to the wire. It was stuff happened season 3. We were there. But it wasn't like season 2 where the end of season 2 was essentially a fastest lap challenge.
Imagine a situation like that in other sports such as F1 and how less eventful it would have been than in Formula E, where it's so frantic that it can pull that off. Because thinking about it, that is a really, really great moment of Formula E, and I just think of it being transferred to other series and it just wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work.
I think that's quite incredible.
And it's possibly an example of how Formula E has moments.
Is its own thing. Yeah.
It is its own thing, cannot be transferred to other forms of motorsport. And I mean, I know that various writers have written articles, including Hazel, about how Formula E should never leave city street circuits because that's its thing. I argued against that because I felt that as electric cars got faster and stronger and better at holding their charge, you could take them to some of the F1 circuits. But
if it's done sensibly and it's not rushed, then yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah,
I would say.
I think it's against the principles of Formula E because it's meant to be going to people, not taking people to it, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
And like, kind of in the general scheme of things, you rather go to where the people are so the people don't have to travel to you, which not only it makes it harder on fans, it's more environmentally sustainable to go where the people are instead of making the people travel. But
Yeah.
I think I would say less than Formula E should move away from city streets. I think they should try to move to larger tracks. Maybe think about trying to have races in large city parks, because I know New York City, Paris, they have massive city parks.
Yes, and I mean, could a Central Park Formula E race ever go ahead?
So I have a tangential story to tell about that.
Okay.
Back in the early 80s, when I don't know what Bernie Ecclestone was on in the early 80s, but he wanted to have a race in New York City. He wanted to have a race in Red Square in Moscow. But his initial idea for having a Grand Prix in New York City was to have one down in Lower Manhattan around the World Trade Center. Obviously, the city was like, no, we have an alternative for you. And the city's proposal to have a Grand Prix was to have one in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, which is famously, to most people outside of the city, that's where New York City hosted the World's Fair. So there is actually a full track map with details and everything about with a Formula One Grand Prix track that is set around a lake in Flushing Meadows Park, around that massive globe that they have there. And it is laid out so similar. It is almost a corner for corner remake of Albert Park.
Well, yes, but it's still nothing like the Caesar's Palace circuit, which is, of course, the greatest street circuit ever built. I think we can all agree.
Well, unfortunately, we can never race at Caesar's Palace again, because they decided to build an arena on the former parking lot at Caesar's Palace. So it is now if you want to go there, you could see artist in residence Celine Dion perform.
Okay. Well, and to be fair, Celine Dion is probably as big, if not slightly bigger a pull than Bruno Giacomelli.
I wouldn't go that far.
Perfect copy of Albert Park. That sounds interesting. I mean, Formula One has really pegged back its ambitions since then. Formula E still going global. Is it a good idea, though? And let's start with Conrad on this one, to go to Seoul in the middle of the European season next season. Are there any inherent problems there, do you think?
Slap bang in the middle of the European season, it'd be a bit like when F1 goes to Canada when they've got into the rhythm of the after Spain and Monaco, and generally they manage fairly well. I mean, it's not exactly the most ideal time, but it's become almost a non-factor, at least to fans and spectators watching. It's more a burden that's carried by the teams. It's a bit of an outlier, and I think that you can get away with that kind. But when it starts to become like pitfall seeds of different races in different continents all around each other, that would definitely cause issues.
And I suspect as well, and I don't know if Sophie or Ryan have got an opinion on this, that it was partly a networking opportunity to see if Formula E could get Kia or Hyundai involved, because now we've got Mahindra involved, we've got an Indian mark, which we've always had since season 1, but we've never had a Korean mark, and isn't that something that Formula E is missing? What do you think, guys?
Well, yeah, it's always felt like Alejandro and the series as a whole has been trying to get a race in, East Asia, in, trying to get either a Korean round or a Japanese round. And, they finally landed it, but it seems like the caveat was it had to be in the middle of the European season.
And it seems like, well, according to the FIA, according to South Korea, that's the only weekend they could have done it. So I guess in a way it's all academic, the debate. But so Jean-Eric Vergne has already clinched the big title of the season. He's already the Vorest Alpine European Series champion. We know that.
Yes.
He's just got a chance to, and which makes New York a bit of a dead rubber, actually. But he's got a chance in this final doubleheader to put the icing on the cake and win the Formula E championship. First of all, Ryan, how important is the Vorest Alpine European Series to you? And secondly, can anything stop Jev from winning in New York? And what do you think it would be if so?
Well, the Vorest Alpine European Trophy is the creme de la creme. It is what everyone fights for, because when I think Formula E, I only think Europe. But also, the New York City E-Prix, man, I always say heading into a doubleheader that, whoever has had the title lead, they got this locked up. There's nothing that could happen, right, Sebastian Buemi?
Yes, indeed. I think he. I think he's been very mindful of WEC clashes ever since. So, actually, coming on to Buemi, which we were going to later. Obviously, Formula E and WEC are now sitting down and talking about this calendar clash after Mr. Agag's brother-in-law, the chief executive, said that there was no point in talking about it. It was settled. So they now decided, actually, we will sit down and talk about it. If they don't get the clashes sorted out, and obviously there is a definite clash with Seoul. Will that mean Sebastian Buemi, having to settle for Toyota in the WEC, because, that's his guaranteed full season at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, there's no way around it. Like, what, next season, if E-Prix number 3. Comes to fruition, and round 7 in China also comes onto the calendar. We have a 14-race season with 3 potential clashes, and I think it just falls outside of the window where you're not allowed to make any driver changes, so it doesn't affect that rule. But if you miss 3 races in the championship, especially in Formula E, where the championship is extremely close every single season, if you miss 3 rounds, there's no way you could win the championship.
Yeah. Although to be fair, Lucas de Grassi had a pretty average start to the season and is still second in the championship now, so it is possible. It just takes a bit of pushing uphill, I guess.
On the subject of Buemi in particular,
yeah.
He knows better than anyone the damage it can do to miss a race in Formula E, because in the 3rd season he missed a double header. Yeah. And even though a lot of people think that he was still in control of the title going into the final double header of the season, and obviously didn't make the best job of that, he would have probably wrapped up that title, I reckon, if he'd just attended all the races. And
yeah,
I feel like that set a precedent that makes it that so that it's going to put a lot more drivers off in future, that they won't be able to skip any race.
Yeah, if he had his average finishing positions in the 2 races he missed, he would have mathematically clinched the championship before Montreal.
But do we need drivers to stop taking 2 jobs? Because at the moment, most of the grid is doing DTM or WEC alongside Formula E.
We need the FIA to make sure those 2 jobs don't clash the best that they can.
Yeah, come on, World Motorsport! Come on, World Motorsport Council! You're costing people their jobs out here.
But do we need Formula E to become a season that is so important that people can't double job during it as a principle?
Well, I think that might become an issue if the season gets longer and longer.
It's naturally becoming that way itself, because look how much closer and closer the racing's getting. And in a season like this, you just can't afford to miss a race unless you're Jean-Eric Vergne right now, and this is the only time.
Yeah, Robin Frines was saying after the last race that the thing that gets to him the most is not actually anything except for the flying. And From everything I've heard, because I was sat on a train next to Envision Virgin or Envirgin Vision, as I keep calling them, hospitality staff who were talking about how he's probably the best sleeper they've ever seen. He's capable of sleeping in any conditions. So they think that fatigue wouldn't be a problem for Robin, but apparently it is. I mean, are we getting to the stage now where it's a bit like Formula One drivers in the 60s, you know, kind of thought maybe doing Formula 5000 and British touring cars in the same season was not healthy? Or do you think it'll carry on this double jobbing for a few seasons? Conrad?
Could carry on for more than a few seasons, to be honest. A lot of these drivers that are in Formula E right now, they had experience in WEC either around that time that the Formula E started, or even before then. And these current crop of drivers that are managing to stay around, Di Grassi, Buemi, D'Ambrosio, etc., have dabbled in WEC, and it makes sense for them to stay there because it's another competitive series and it's another one that's in the world view, very important. There's a chance that when the old guard go and the younger drivers come in, the Maxi Gunters and other drivers, they seem to be wanting to put a lot more well, I don't want to say dedication because that makes it sound like I'm detracting from the drivers that are already there, but they're willing to just have laser sharp, single-guided focus on Formula E, apart from maybe the odd race that won't clash. I think it could depend on the driver set.
But to add on to what Conrad said about the newer drivers coming in, with the seasons becoming longer and longer, there's more commitments away from the racing itself in terms of, testing and development, simulator work. It's just, Formula E is just becoming more and more of a time commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked Gary Paffett what he thought of people after the race. I asked him after the race what he thought of people double jobbing, what he thought of people trying to be successful in two different sports. I thought he'd be an interesting one to ask because he's obviously the 2018 DTM champion and left that all behind. First of all, he said that his only option for DTM was Aston Martin, and he didn't fancy hanging around at the back, which, fair play to him. And also, it would have put the great Ferdinand Habsburg out of a drive. So, guy's got to make a living somehow. And also, he said, in his opinion, drivers are paid enough to focus on one form of the sport. I mean, is there a financial angle that although drivers are paid a lot, they're paid the right amount, and that they should be able to do as many different sports as they want within motorsport? What do you think, Sophie?
That's quite an interesting view on it. I don't think I've ever looked at it that way. I mean, it's no secret that they get paid a lot, but I don't think they race so many different series in 1 year purely for the pay, because if that was it, there wouldn't be world-class racing drivers. Obviously that's got to factor into it somehow, because they have to be able to fund their lifestyle somehow. But I think I'm not 100% that money is the biggest factor. I think when you look at Formula E drivers, double jobbing, I think it was in the first few seasons, because Formula E wasn't such a big time commitment. There wasn't so much testing or in-season work, and the races were months between, whereas now there's so much more to it. So I think, drivers are seeing it as a bigger commitment than it may have been in the past.
Ryan, any thoughts on these poor racing drivers scraping together a living, being forced to stick to one form of the sport?
Now, I don't think it's wholly about pay. I think it actually goes back to, say, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, and the 30s, where drivers raced in multiple series. Number one, because they enjoy doing it. Number two, it's a way to make sure that they're seen as a good driver. That you're seen as a good driver if you're, if you're competitive in multiple series at once, where Jim Clark famously raced in the British Saloon Car Championship, the Indianapolis 500, and Formula One in the same year.
Yeah, and actually, he got quite good. If I'm right, I haven't obviously scoured the record books, but he got decent results in the Lotus Cortina in the BTCC that season, didn't he? Am I right?
He was champion. He was champion.
Well, there we go. Some people have just got it, haven't they?
Yeah, some people just got it.
Okay, and to think I'm moaning about finding time to put together a music podcast at the same time as a Formula E podcast at the same time as my day job. You know, if I were more like Jim Clark, I'd just get out of bed and do them all. Anyway, the New York City circuit, it's the same one that they've raced on before, but for people new to the sport, what can we expect, and what have we had in previous seasons, and also do the American fans take to Formula E? Well, I think we'd better start with our with our American super sub. So, Ryan, what do the Americans think of Formula E, particularly in New York?
Oh, I'd say, as a New Yorker, it feels weird to start off with that, but I would say there is an audience for it, but it's just on the basis of, the venue only holds, I think, about like 20 or 25,000 people, and it's the city itself is 8 million. In the whole metropolitan area, it's like closer to like 10. So when you trying to fill a venue of that size isn't a problem. They pretty much always sell out, despite the ticket prices being a lot higher than other places on the calendar and other events in the city. And speaking with fans who go to the event, they are diehard racing fans. I would say they are more racing fans than electric car fans. They're there for the drivers who they've watched for years finally come to New York.
Yeah, they're there for, as the Paris mayoral candidate put it, the infernal scream of loud engines, which you can just about hear if you go up to the side of the track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously the big draw is the IPC trophy, and we'll come to that in a minute. But Conrad, have you enjoyed New York E-Prix in previous seasons? Do you have a particular New York highlight?
I've definitely enjoyed New York. It's obviously not my top favourite race, but it's quite close. I enjoy the fact that America appears to be quite inviting, and as Ryan said, sometimes I feel like it makes for a better atmosphere when people are there more to see their favourite drivers. It makes it more amicable, I found, rather than less. And speaking of races, I've definitely enjoyed it in Season 3 because that's obviously when the tension was heating up. We thought that Sebastian Buemi would still be able to win the championship, even though he was missing a race. Well, 2 races, technically doubleheader, but
and we got to
it turned out that it wasn't. It wasn't a done deal.
Yeah, and that year we got to see Pierre Gasly in a Formula E car.
Oh, Pierre Gasly, yeah, he made his FE debut. He did so well.
He absolutely tanked, didn't he? He made Nico Prost look good.
I thought he did well in the circumstances in his first FE race, and 2018, I feel like that goes under the radar in Formula One.
For short notice, he was good. A 7th and a 4th is not bad on short notice.
Yeah, to be fair, you're right, and I would say as well, if the rumours come true and he is dropped from Red Bull, I think it'll be unfair if he is, but if he is,
I've made peace with it now. Yeah. I mean, it's Helmut Marko we're talking about.
But I mean, if Pato O'Ward comes in to race alongside Verstappen, I think he'll be Formula E's gain, because Formula E is the sport for Red Bull rejects to excel in, isn't it?
Wait, do you reckon that they'll promote him straight to Red Bull? Because if they did, that would be a brave move.
Well,
I
think they'll promote Albon, and then I do wonder if obviously we're straying into F1 territory, but like I'll get
Go
to
ahead.
Formula E.
Go ahead.
That if Pierre's dropped by Red Bull, they might just release him entirely, and he might find a mid-grid seat. I can see Romain Grosjean leaving Haas. I reckon they would try to move mountains to be able to get someone like Pierre in. And if that couldn't come across, like if he ended up in an Esteban Ocon situation where there's just no seat and Red Bull had dropped him, then I could definitely see him going to Formula E and making a Stoffel Van Dorn-esque career out of it.
Yeah, so Sophie, you don't think Pierre will be going to Formula E or anywhere else anytime soon?
No, I actually said that about bringing Pato up to Red Bull straight away.
Okay.
Oh Lord.
Going back a few years to when we thought Buemi could have won after missing a few rounds, after missing a round, I think. It's just the excitement, and it's Formula E, so it's always going to throw up a good race no matter what.
I've got conflicting thoughts about the I-Pace. It's a great idea. I think electric touring cars hooning around a narrow Formula E track is spectacular to watch. I think that sometimes some of the things those guys do look insane in the best possible way. I love that we've got Adam Carroll back now, supposedly making wood-fired pizzas in a restaurant in Ireland in the week, and then driving the I-Pace at weekends. The guy has won at life. But I had the opportunity to go to Berlin and watch the I-Paces in practice, and I was stood by the side of the track, and I know this is what you get with electric cars generally, but because they're entirely road derived, the I-Paces just aren't exciting to listen to, and they're exciting on TV, but they're not exciting from the track side for me. And it was kind of like standing by a busy B road and watching commuters go home on a Friday evening. That's not to say it wasn't phenomenal being so close to them, and you could see the effort going in when they were cornering. But I mean, do you think Jaguar needs to soup up the I-Paces and make them more race tuned, maybe closer to a Formula E in terms of pace, while still being a touring car? Conrad?
I'm not particularly sure, and I've dabbled in and out of the I-Pace trophy. I've watched some of it, but I've not been a consistent person who's tuned in. I've quite enjoyed it, to be honest. I've kind of enjoyed the racing. It's not been quite Formula E standard, but I never really expected that. And to be honest, I've enjoyed seeing some drivers who have had less and less chances to break through in motorsport get their chance, and some returning faces like Adam Carroll. One thing I do want to point out about I-Pace, please, TWR to Cheetah, don't use that livery like that. It doesn't look on an I-Pace. That's always been a gripe of mine.
You don't think the silk cut livery is
I love the silk cut livery. It just doesn't work on an I-Pace or like anything like too tall.
See, I think the most beautiful silk cut Jaguar livery anyway was the one that they wore in their final season. That all purple livery. I think that would work on an I-Pace. But yeah, it's a classic example of squeezing something that shouldn't be onto. It's like when you see a Mini Cooper with the old rally livery on it. It's that kind of thing.
Oh, it's especially they actually did race the Mini Countryman in rallies, but then even seeing it as a rally car, like an official rally car, I just think no, just no, please. But yeah, with the one I'd love to see on an I-Pace, if we're going to talk about old Le Mans liveries, is the pink Porsche livery with the lines on it. You know which one I'm on about.
So you can see where to cut the pig. Yeah.
That one. I love that one. That one's so underrated.
Interesting choice for a vegan.
That's a fair point.
But it is a wonderful livery. You're right. Sophie, any liveries that you'd like to see on an I-Pace? Any that you think would work better than that pseudo silk cut livery?
The British touring car Peartec livery, absolute classic.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Can you remind me of that?
completely blue with the Pertec logo on it, or even Jamie Caroline's F4 British Championship car that was completely chrome blue with the Pertec livery on it. It looked incredible, and I think that would look so good on one of the iPace cars.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. But yeah, Conrad, you mentioned that there are some drivers being given a chance again, and there are also some drivers being given a chance for the first time. Chris Soulsby, who's been covering the iPace Trophy in more depth than pretty much anyone actually, from Motorsport Monday, said that Celia Martin. It's actually her first season of professional racing, which is incredible to think about, really, isn't it?
That definitely is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, are there any other drivers that you point out as, being particular highlights of this season?
One thing I would like to discuss about that is actually, because it brings on to an important discussion, when it comes to starting out in a series, starting out racing iPace as in city streets, would that be one of the easiest ways to be able to break in rather than going through a smaller touring car route or like one of the lowest single-seater formulas that an iPace trophy could be like one of the most ideal places to start?
Well, that's a really intriguing question, and actually, I thought about this in line with Jamie Chadwick, because she's really flitting between all kinds of different formulae this season. She's doing the W Series, which obviously she's very successful in. She's definitely. I mean, looks like she might actually win the thing. She's doing the GTs, Aston Martin. She's doing Williams simulator driving. And she's also doing bits and pieces of junior driver testing for Neo Formula E. And I actually wondered if that kind of experience was good, or if it was a bit like, going from grass court tennis to clay court tennis to hard court tennis in the same 2 week space, and if it actually, kind of messed with your rhythm a bit. But it made me think, is there a better kind of e-racing pathway? So, for example, could we eventually be talking about people going into the iPace as a natural progression to Formula E, or maybe there's space for a formula between the two, a kind of Formula 4 electrified, I mean, Ryan, what do you think? Is there an e-racing pathway that you can see being distinct from the FIA motorsport pathway?
Well, I think it's hard to say, but my feeling is that the iPace isn't comparable to the FE cars. I'd say in terms of a power to weight ratio. Obviously, the racing experience is going to be the same because the cars are they're crossover SUVs. There's no way to put it, but the same circuits, they're very tight. It's a challenging series racing. I just don't think they're comparable to the FE cars. I would like an analog. I'd probably say would be comparing the Porsche Super Cup to Formula One, but obviously way less stark than that.
And of course we know that the distance between very different formulae is not that wide, because Ranganathan's gone from Boss GP to Formula 2.
One thing that I really want to point out about the 2017 season, I was checking the listings the other day, and one of the people in it is just referenced as Peter. And I mean, like they just think his name is Peter. They just guessed.
I think it's just like in Japan, where they still have that spirit where you can race under a nom de course and just like, what's your nom de course going to be? Peter. Anything else? Not just Peter.
Are you sure it's not? Are you sure it's not the same guy from Deadpool 2 who was in X-Force, the only one to survive?
It could well be. I mean, we don't technically know because it might not be Peter, but he's just suggested that could be his name. They might be too nervous to ask.
It would be.
There was one DTM driver in the 90s. His real name was Louis Crages. He was German, but he competed under the nom de plume John Winter for some reason. And I'm not sure anyone actually bothered to ask him why.
No, because that is a strange thing. Like, especially it still exists in the VLN, where it's like clearly German people race under English names.
But I mean, there is no. I have to look it up later and find out. But there is no real link between John Winter and Louis Krages. It's not like an anglicised version of the name, is it?
Yeah, they just pick a random English name.
And I seem to remember actually Formula 3000, the predecessor to GP2 Formula 2. There was a driver who went under the racing name Babalus.
Yes, yes.
You remember him?
I remember him as in flipping through the record sheets. I did see that name.
And if I recall rightly, he was even almost as quick as Christian Horner when he was driving.
Yes, he was as quick as Christian Horner.
But by the way,
that's a claim to fame.
Yeah, my favourite bit of banter on the grid ever was when it was a beautiful day at Silverstone, I think, and Martin Brundle was talking to Christian Horner on the grid, and Martin Brundle said, "Beautiful day, isn't it, Christian?" And Christian Horner said, "Yeah, just a shame you're too old and slow to drive, isn't it?" And Martin Brundle said in return, "It's just a shame you were never quick enough to drive, isn't it?"
Oh, I remember that.
Savage mode.
Yeah, but I kind of think Christian left the door open for that one. So, looking at the back of the field, we've got four teams who are, well, in the case of Jaguar, Mitch Evans has really dragged that up the field, and since Alex Lynn came in for Nelson Piquet, they've really made improvements. But still, bottom four teams, if we exclude HWA, who are becoming Mercedes next season, and will presumably improve leaps and bounds: Neo, Venturi, Jaguar, and Dragon. Now, let's go through each of these teams and talk about what we would improve to, get them on a closer footing to the big, massive OEMs that are running the front of the grid teams. So, shall we start with the one that's at the real back of the grid, Neo? What do they need to do to improve? They've got major powertrain issues. They've got issues with integrating brake-by-wire, but what do they need to do to get closer to the pace? Is it a case of keeping drivers the same? Do they need to change drivers? Do they need to just look at the technical side? What is it? Let's start with Ryan on this.
Oh God, this is very difficult for Neo. Where I would say they have to keep a driver, just in terms of just having some continuity, some grounding in whether they're making technical improvements or not, which they definitely need to. Though, I think they should drop Tom Dillman, keep Oliver Turvey, and try to find someone on pace to Oliver.
I would just like to see Tom Dillman have something to smile about, because he seems like a lovely bloke, but he's job sharing between Neo and Bike-Holles, and I'm not sure what he has to smile about at the moment.
That he gets to be a professional racing driver,
I suppose. Although he does have to drive the Bike-Holles. Anyway, yeah. Conrad, what would you improve with Neo to bring them closer to their previous season's form?
I have a similar mindset to Ryan on this. I'd have to swap out Tom Dillman. I love the guy, and I'm thankful he exists, because it meant I got to make a really good 4 a.m. meme in the Le Mans 24 hours about him. But other than that, he's not a right fit for Neo. Oliver Turvey, on the other hand, they have to move mountains to be able to keep him, because he'll be crucial to their progression in the next few years if they do make any. I feel that he's a genuinely quick driver. And if he's given the machinery to compete, he'll do a very good job in Formula E. He's shown it in the past that he's got the one-lap pace in the racecraft. On the car side of things, I mean, there's a lot that needs to improve there wherever they can. And team personnel definitely seems a little bit disjointed. A common theme within a lot of the teams lower down the grid is that they need a team leader who is both calm and uncompromised, kind of like Frederick Vasseur in Formula One, say, or as close to a Jean Todt as they could get. They need someone who is able to keep things calm, keep things, rational, and have a long-term plan. Because one thing I noticed from a lot of these teams further down the grid is it seems like they live on the short term, and that won't get them anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, they did have upheaval at the end of 2016 when Dr. Martin Leach, the chairman of the company, died. But since then, Jerry Hughes has stepped up to take on the racing operation, and I mean, the guy's got huge pedigree. He actually ran Super Aguri when they had that fantastic season in 2007. He was there for the whole Super Aguri journey, actually. So. I think they've got the right people in management. They just need to maybe have a better link up between the technical side and the administration side. I know that they're one of the very few teams that still have their cars based at the old Donington pens where Formula E first started. So they are working on a new factory, but obviously, while Neo in China is putting huge amounts of money into the team, it's not like BMW. It's not a case of building a new factory tomorrow. So these things will take time. It's just kind of a hope that obviously they will get closer to the pace next season, even without this factory containing all of the staff. But yeah, it's difficult. And Sophie, would you say one of the problems with Neo is that when they came in, they were one of the big fish, and now they're one of the medium sized, maybe even one of the smaller fish in Formula E?
I mean, they did very, very quickly drop from being championship winners to not even finishing races. So maybe it's a dent in confidence. Maybe it's the drivers. I think it's it's quite common to see that Formula E teams are quite disjointed, and I feel like that could be, they've got good management, and then they've got one driver that I think fits them very well, and then somewhere in the middle, I think maybe it's become slightly disjointed somewhere.
I would say it's not a case of Neo getting slower. I would say it's a case of maybe a rising tide doesn't raise all the boats, where manufacturer spending increasing at the other teams kind of set Neo on the back foot, where they couldn't keep up with the other teams in terms of the amount of development and just preparation they were putting into the series.
Quite possibly. Okay, well, we move on to another team for whom finding things to improve. In this case, Geox Dragon, finding things to improve is like shooting fish in a barrel right now.
Really
is. It's do we do to improve Dragon racing next season, Conrad?
Well, thankfully they're not quite at the stage of putting wet tyres on in dry conditions and broken steering columns. So thankfully they've not got to that stage of Andrea Moda. There's a lot for them to improve. Jose Maria Lopez is walking, and they've got to prepare for that. He's definitely going. He's had enough. He's destroyed. And you've been able to tell it from this season by the fact that he's definitely a quick driver, but he's been incredibly erratic. And we think to that, I can't actually remember the race off the top of my head, but one of them, he had an absolute nightmare of a turn one, and he eventually caused a pile up.
That was right.
So, yeah, I knew it was one of the European rounds. And they need to keep hold of Maxi Gunter. That experiment with Felipe Nasr, nothing against Felipe because he tried his hardest, but it didn't work, and it robbed Max a chance to get used to the Dragon car and be able to prepare to be a team leader for when Jose inevitably leaves. And the way the structure is, it just feels like everyone's there on borrowed time. Not one person within that organisation, well, maybe 2 or 3, could be there within 6 months or a year, and it's just it's a conveyor belt of different ins and outs, and that's what I mean by short-term thinking. What are they trying to build?
And for some reason, Jay Penske believes that he is the right man to be on the radio to drivers, even though it looks as though Maxi Gunter is going to walk as well as Paquito Lopez. Who should drive the Dragon? Sophie, do you have anyone who you would wish upon the chance to drive the Dragon next season?
I would not subject that to anyone. I couldn't even come up with a driver because I don't think anyone deserves to be racing for a team where they don't know whether or not they'll be in the car next race.
Not even Tiffany Dell.
There might be a slight exception there.
But yeah, so Dragon. I mean, it's great that we have smaller teams on the grid. I just wish that there wasn't so much wrong with the way that they ran their drivers. And for me, the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, was when Maxi Gunter qualified. I think it was 5th on the grid for Bern, and Jay Penske came on the radio and said, "See, guys, that's the driver we hired."
And Hazel made a very good point about that, saying the driver that they hired, fired, and then rehired.
But, okay, so it's slightly more difficult call now in terms of what to improve, because I think they have already come on leaps and bounds this season. Venturi. Now, Susie Wolf came in. She was an unknown quantity as team principal. I think has done a pretty good job, I think, of organising the team. Mortara won in Hong Kong after a penalty for Bird, and while they slipped back, they seem to know what they need to improve in the close season. So the question really is more, and I did try to ask the drivers this, and I got some very polite answers about what they were going to try to do, but they've confirmed Massa and Mortara for next season. But is there any chance, Conrad, of Venturi challenging Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, the big boys next season?
Oh, that's a tough call. I don't see it personally. At least not in season 6, maybe in other seasons, and you never know what kind of deal they could strike. I mean, if your suspicions about the Grand Prix in Seoul do work, and Kia or Hyundai decided to come into the sport, there's a potential team that's there to be partnered with. As things are right now, Susie Wolf's easing into the role as Venturi boss, doing pretty decent job of it, like around what could be expected. And the driver pairing's fairly solid. I mean, Eduardo Mortara's the clear leader, and a lot of us are glad to see it because he's an all-round nice guy, and especially people like Hazel are probably glad to see it because he's an absolute hunk. But yeah, Felipe Massa, he's been struggling, probably the weakest link so far. But again, even though he's a seasoned F1 veteran, Formula E is a different kettle of fish entirely, and he has taken a podium recently. So he is getting the hang of it, but I still see Mortara beating him next season as well. And there probably is a bit of a question mark over how long Felipe wants to go on in Formula E, because obviously he's no spring chicken. Mortara's a little bit younger, I believe.
I think maybe while Formula E veterans were not surprised at Felipe's struggles to adapt, maybe Felipe was. I think he was seriously shocked by some of the driving standards when he was pounded into the wall in Santiago by Roland on the main straight, for example. And I think also it must have stung being called an effing useless amateur by Nelson Piquet of all people.
The same Nelson Piquet that isn't around to actually call him it again. So you could say Felipe had the last laugh.
and the same Nelson Piquet who arguably cost him the 2008 world title as well. That's deep. So I think Felipe maybe felt that he'd be. I mean, drivers have self-belief, of course. You know, they have to. But I think maybe Felipe felt he'd be doing better. But Mortara's really stolen this season, and for me, he's the most impressive driver, just ahead of Oliver Rowland, I would say, in terms of taking. I was about to say taking his package. In terms of taking the overall car package and making it work, grabbing that first win for Venturi, you know, it's been a fantastic effort this season, and I would love to see Venturi do better. But Ryan, Venturi, it's a small OEM. It's a niche manufacturer. They do make road cars. They make one called the Fetish, believe it or not. What can the team do to improve next season?
Oh, what can the team do to improve? I think they're on a good course. I would say it's not worth changing any of your drivers over. I think Felipe will ease his way into racing in FE. I think the most important thing they need to do is make sure they don't lose their technical partnership with HWA and Mercedes-Benz.
Right, yes, that could be a big thing. Although, when you look at the way that HWA have used their power units, it's not as if HWA have run away with the season with the customer power unit. So, is it just a case that the Venturi power unit is being developed as much as they have the budget to do?
Yes, I believe so. And I think that the partnership will start working the other way once, Mercedes becomes fully involved next season, and it'll benefit them more in the long term. Maybe it won't be, completely evident next year, but maybe the year after that.
Yeah, and I mean, let's have a show of hands in the pod for who would like to see Jacques Villeneuve return in a management capacity. Yeah, thought so.
Let's have a driver partnership of Tiff and Jacques Dragon and just make them the most hated team. The rich energy of Formula E.
Actually, let's just bring Rich Energy to Formula E. I
think.
That'd
be amazing.
I don't think electric cars are their brand.
I did actually launch my own premium brand of Energy Sweet, Energy Candy earlier in the season. Didn't go very far, but I launched Hello Sailor, the premium lozenge that was hashtag better than Fisherman's Friend. And I tried to get a technical partnership with a team. None of the Formula E teams were interested. I'm hoping to push it again next season. We do have 10 million lozenges ready to go, and they will be given to every driver that finishes on the podium next season. So let's see how that goes.
How do we reckon that Formula E teams would cope with a rich energy, say? That kind of dynamic, because we've seen that Formula One teams generally just try to ignore them as much as possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because actually, while for legal reasons we can't say too much about the financing of Rich Energy, presumably lower down the motorsport ladder, there are sponsors who come in promising the world and then don't deliver. I'm thinking.
Oh yeah. You see it all the time. There's, you can get to the point of, signing contracts and sorting agreements, and then they, suddenly disappear, or you can sign everything and nothing ever comes of it, or you can, have companies that don't even want to do it with a contract, which I'm pretty sure is, not 100% legal, when there's large amounts of money involved. There are quite a lot of times where I've seen, drivers getting in with a sponsor and then they've not stuck to, their agreement.
We'll say cheerio at this point to Sophie. Thank you so much for coming on, and
no problem.
And also, I really hope that the new Formula One fan in your life will also become a Formula E fan at some point.
I'm gonna try it out for NYC.
Yeah, and again, thank you for taking time out of your evening to do this. Really appreciate it.
No problem whatsoever. Thank you for having me.
See you again. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So we've got one more team to review. That's Jaguar Racing. They're the closest to actually being sorted. They've won a race with Mitch Evans. They came very close in Bern to winning another race. And Alex Lynn has shown how as a team they're working together. They seem to support their drivers, and James Barkley is a fantastic team principal who I think even teams like Williams in F1 could do with. But is there anything they could do to get closer to the front? And is it a concern, Ryan, that Jaguar Racing has a parent company that is in slight financial difficulties?
Oh, I think the current course of the team is fantastic, but I think the point you mentioned might put a ceiling on their potential, where at the sharper end of the grid, where you're competing against Nissan Renault and Nissan Renault Alliance and Volkswagen Group with Audi, where you're really going to have to be financially secure to know reliably that you'd be able to put resources into the team on a year in, year out basis.
Conrad, would you agree?
Yeah, I reckon I would. One thing that I want to establish about Jaguar is that they've got a lot of the right ingredients at the moment in the pot, in that they've got the manufacturer backing, although it might not be to the same tune as Mercedes or even Nissan, but there's financial might there that some of the lower teams down the grid don't have. They've got the best driver of around that group, I'd say, Mitch Evans. I'm not particularly sure Alex Lynn's much more than a stopgap measure. I mean, with the greatest respect to him, it just feels a bit of a short-term move, and they might try to see if they could maybe even land Maxi Gunter, like if he decides he'd really rather not stay at Dragon, and try and build something around him and Mitch. I reckon that could be a great partnership. And James Barkley, I definitely rate. I feel like they're the only one of that group that have a consistent enough plan that could succeed in the long term, and they've just got to keep rolling with it until they get there.
And definitely they've improved season on season. That first car was a bit of a disaster. They improved it for season 4, and this season again they've taken leaps and bounds forwards. I think, actually, without putting too much shade on Nelson Piquet, after they had two drivers who were both giving excellent feedback and both capable of keeping the pace, I think they've been able to prove their point in terms of technical development much better. Piquet is not a terrible driver. You don't win any title by being a terrible driver, but I just feel like maybe some of the noise he was making on social media, some of the interviews he was giving, suggested that he was tired of driving for a mid-grid team. So maybe it's good that Alex Lynn got the chance. But you mentioned Alex Lynn, Conrad, might be a bit of a stopgap. Is there any way he might stay with the team next season? Because is there any way we'll see him on the grid next season with Jaguar?
An explosive end to the season within the final 2 races could possibly swing it, but it just depends who's on the driver market and who they can entice, because Jaguar are going to have more pulling power than a Venturi or a Neo, I feel. And that could be the difference. If we were talking about this same situation without Jaguar and instead it was a Neo, then there'd be a larger possibility that they keep someone like Lynn on. But with Jaguar, I feel that more and more options could open up for them. It's a tough one to call, but that's my hunch.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We've talked about the bottom 4 Formula E teams and what they can do to improve. Ryan, just a closing thought on HWA becoming Mercedes next season. Is it all going to be roses from now on, or are they going to find it more difficult than we imagine? In other words, are they going to be more of a BMW Andretti or more of a Jaguar to begin with?
I think it would be closer to what BMW went through, where they're not starting from scratch. They had this year with HWA, but it's still a hard climb to the top in Formula E. Probably harder in it's the hardest initial entry compared to any other championship as a manufacturer.
So I'm very much hoping that obviously I'm going to be journalistic. I'm going to be honest with my review, but I am an advocate of electric vehicles. I want to see more companies producing them. So I'm definitely not going to do Jeremy Clarkson and trash the car. I think it's worth its place on the road. My criticism, if there is any, will be about the things they can improve to make an even better car, because it looks amazing. I just hope it drives as good as it looks.
Oh, me too. Me too.
All right. Well, where are you guys going to be watching the New York E-Prix? Are you going to be in the comfort of your own homes like me, or are you planning to go around to a friend's house and get some beers in? What are you doing?
Ooh, I will be there in person.
Really? Oh, cool. Okay. So, are you in the grandstands or the press room?
Not 100% sure yet. Hopefully, the press room.
I really hope so, because, I guess you've been there before, haven't you? So you know what it's like.
Yeah, I know what it's like. I've been there every year since they've run it.
Yeah. It's every bit as good as I hoped it would be, but I think during Berlin I was just walking around with starry eyes thinking, oh my God, this is what I thought, this is what 10-year-old me thought I'd be doing. And I still feel a bit like that. But Bern was a bit more like, okay, I can handle myself here. But, did you feel like that the first time you went in the press room? Like, oh my God, what do I do now?
Well, this time will actually be my first time in the press room. I've done press for other races that are not Formula E. My experience in those rooms is mainly just like me. I've never been here before. I'm panicking. I don't know what to do.
And Conrad, I mean, I like to I like to sit and live tweet with some biscuits close to hand, with either a Coke or either Coca-Cola or beer, depending on how I'm feeling on the day. But how are you going to be watching the New York E-Prix?
Probably in that exact same fashion, from the comfort of four walls. So that should be fun.
And has veganism narrowed your biscuit options?
I can still have pink wafers, and that's all that matters. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Pink wafers for the win. And by the way, BWT, you know what my logo looks like. Just call me for a sponsorship. I would love for you to sponsor. Just saying.
It's a match already made, BWT. Come on, do it.
Yeah, please do it.
In fact, you know what? I really fancy some filtered water now. So
so do I, as it turns out.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much, guys. It's been a long one. I hope it hasn't cut into your day too much and what you were planning to do. But really appreciate you having you on. I'm Stuart Garlick, _motion FE on Twitter, medium.com/e-motion.